All right, Stefan, I think it'd be really cool if you gave the new CEO, Johann Zeitz, a message in your native tongue of German and maybe give him a little encouragement or some type of message.
My German is as bad as my English is.
Okay. I hope not.
I'm gonna try. Okay, lieber Jochen, wir sind alle froh, dass du und dein Team die Geschicke von Harley jetzt leitest. Wir lieben die Marke, wir lieben die Produkte und wir wünschen euch viel Erfolg. Auf geht's, Backmas.
I don't have to bleep any of that out because of profanity, do I?
No, you don't, but you have to practice the pronunciation of the name. It's not Johann Zeitz, it's Jochen Zeitz.
Okay, well, let me try that again. So, Jochen Zeitz?
Jochen, the Jochen was pretty good. Zeitz with a Z.
Okay. Jochen Zeitz?
This is never going to work.
Okay, forget it. I'm done with this German thing. All right, guys, we want to welcome you out to Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson podcast, episode number 9. And today we're going to be talking about a pretty hot topic, I think, that is discussed a lot among Harley-Davidson riders, and that is suspension. And today we've got kind of a special guest here. He comes a long way overseas from Germany. And yeah, so we have Stefan on the show here today. So thank you for joining us today, Stefan.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And he's an enthusiast, big time. He's got a 2019 CVO Road Glide, and he likes a comfortable ride. And so he's done a lot of his own research on suspension, and so he's going to kind of contribute to our conversation as well. Of course, we have Keith Hurt here as well, who has a long history, obviously, in the service department and, you know, doing suspension, everything you can think of, most every brand out there. He's installed it, he's ridden on it, and so he's got, you know, a pretty qualified opinion on the whole suspension thing. So
yeah, I'm excited about this one, Matt. This has been on my list for a little while, as you know, to try to like get into it and really like break it down the best we can. Obviously, we can't cover every possible combination, but we're going to do our best to hit what we can, and sure we'll get a lot of questions, but we'll answer those as they come up. So
yeah, and I think a lot of people have questions about, you know, what suspension to buy, and we're going to cover obviously that, and it's kind of some questions you can ask yourself to determine what the best suspension is for you and your application, what type of riding you plan on doing. But you know, first off, so you may ask, who's this guy Stefan that's here on the show? So
some have seen me maybe before,
not
on the show. Yeah.
He's actually appeared on the YouTube channel before. When I was getting wheelbars installed on my bike, actually it was a demo bike at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Stefan's actually a viewer of the YouTube channel, and funny story about him. So, you know, I've run a couple different suspension setups on my bike. I had Fox, which was great. I had Reservoir, which was great as well. And Stefan kept telling me, "Hey Matt, you got to try Wilbur's." And I was like, "Wilbur's? Who's ever heard of Wilbur's? I've never heard of this like obscure."
Who needs Wilbur's? Yeah.
Yeah, who needs it? We got all these other brands that have all the marketing behind them and the brand recognition, and so. You know, I kind of brushed him off for a long time. You know, sorry about that, because you know, Stefan's actually a really good guy and we're friends now. But he was pretty persistent, and finally to the point where he's like, "Hey, you got to try this stuff. I'm going to give you a set to try on your bike, because I think the type of riding you do with your wife and everything, this is going to suit you really well." And so he gave me a set, and I had it installed first on a demo bike, which was on a video on the YouTube channel. Rode it a couple times, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is actually really good stuff. And it's, you know, both front and rear suspension. So you change the springs in the front and then, you know, shocks in the back. We'll get a little bit more into it in a minute. But then I had that suspension. I liked it so much, I had it transferred over to my white Street Glide, my 2018, a.k.a. the Storm Glide. And I ride with it now, and my wife rides with it, and it self-adjusts, and I love it. So anyways, during this whole time, we've talked quite a bit about suspension and the pros and the cons, not just about Wilbur's, but yeah, pretty intellectual guy. And we've had some pretty good conversations about suspension, and Stefan kind of does his own work as well. And in his I'm assuming your garage, right?
Stefan's Garage. That's the name of my small business. I started it in addition to my regular job. But you know, I have so much fun in wrenching on bikes. So I'm doing all the maintenance on the bikes of my friends. I upgraded, before I started the business, 5 or 6 bikes up to Wilbers or different kinds, my own to Öhlins before. And I just like wrenching in the garage. So the tool set is pretty complete and it's just fun.
Yeah.
So kind of meditation for me.
That's how that's how it starts.
Yeah.
I'm going to put a link to Stefan's garage up here in the corner. So if you guys want to check out his YouTube channel, you can check that out. He's right now growing. What do you got, like 5 or 6 or 7 videos up there at this point? Or
I think already 10, but I had a long break of about 10 weeks because now I'm working on my small business and on the regular business as well. It was kind of trying to figure something out, trying to get used to editing programs. But then I realized that it's quite a long way to get 100K subscribers and I won't live that long. So I focused on different things. You might notice a little difference when you're watching my videos in comparison to professional videos. So
I never realized how much production goes into these things, but we've had a few people in, and like Jeff Holt was here, and he does a lot of social media, and he's like, man, you guys have a 3-camera setup? And I'm like, yeah, Matt spends like a whole day editing these things. I had no idea, you know, like how great of a setup we have.
It took me 10 hours to make a 10-minute video. 10 hours. So that's in that time I've converted 5 bikes or like that.
We're lucky. We're lucky to have Matt and all this equipment.
It's definitely something you got to learn, and you know, I've been doing it for a little over 10 years now. So I started off as a newbie and kind of sucked at first as well, but we've progressed. We've come a long way since then, and production value is important. So so let's start off, Keith. Let's start off kind of, I think some of the big questions we're going to kind of answer for people is how to determine if you need suspension in the first place. And you know, there's a million different types of suspension out there. How do you choose the best suspension for yourself?
Yeah, so let's, you know, I thought I would start off by kind of, you know, framing what we're going to talk about, and we'll get into the details. And as we go along, you know, Stefan has some input, and I'm sure you have questions too. But the first thing I want to emphasize, everyone, is like there's no silver bullet when it comes to suspension. There's no magic pill. There's no, you know, this is the number one for everyone.
One size fits all.
That doesn't exist, which is good and bad. You know, it's good because there's a lot of options out there. It's bad because everyone always asks me like, hey, what do you recommend? It's like, well, what kind of riding do you do? And we'll talk about that too. And also like the suspension completely changes the way the bike feels. I mean, 100%. If you've never ridden a bike that has, you know, a nicest tuned suspension on it, it's a whole different thing than what you feel when you're just, you know, get on your bike that's brand new and you go ride it. And Matt and I were talking about this earlier, and Stefan and I too, just before this, that if the suspension, if you haven't ridden your bike and you haven't actually had it like adjusted to you, especially the preload, which a lot of dealers are not good at that. They'll send a bike out with no preload, and then like I was telling Matt earlier, you know, first thing you do is you go home and get your wife or girlfriend or whatever and get on the bike, and now you're adding, you know, more load, and you go for a ride, and then she's riding around and she's like, wow, this thing is really rough. Like this,
and she never rides with you again after that. She's done.
And it's a simple, and especially on the new bikes, it's a simple 2-minute thing. Pop the saddlebag off, find the suspension adjustment, adjust the knob on the touring bike anyways, and you're pretty much in the right area as long as you're, you know, follow the little chart in the manual and stuff like that, or get someone at the dealership to do it. I try to do it for our customers that I come in contact with, you know, that I know are leaving, just as like, you know, a little bit of detail, and makes it feel a little bit better, I think, or I hope, you know, on their ride home, that they're not like bottoming out or whatever and having, you know, these questions about why does this thing feel this way, you know, or whatever.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that there is adjustment preload capabilities on a Harley-Davidson. A lot of people, that doesn't even trigger in their mind that, hey, this thing needs to be adjusted for my weight.
It's necessary because I rode a lot of rental bikes here, and the saddlebags are not with the quick disconnects.
Yeah.
They are fixed with nuts. You can't remove
so people
them.
Can't
it's like a anti-theft hardware they put on them.
Yeah, for the bags, but there's no way to adjust the preload. So you just have to be lucky to get one that suits your way of riding.
Yeah. So in case you guys don't know, the adjustment on the touring bikes where you adjust the preload is behind the left saddlebag. Right. So without being able to take the saddlebag off, that makes things kind of hard to adjust the suspension.
Yeah, so like I want to emphasize that, you know, it definitely feels different, changes the way the bike feels, and you know, we'll talk about how, you know, you want to choose a package that's for your intended purpose. What are you trying to do? Like what kind of riding do you do? You know, what's your style of riding? What kind of roads do you ride on? All these things, or, you know, what do you want it to do for you? And then, you know, we can get into that in a little bit. But in my experience, you know, there's two reasons people really want to work on their suspension. Number one, reason, and the only reason I say it's number one is because it's easiest to explain, is looks. They want a certain ride height. And when you want a certain ride height, the quality of the ride a lot of times doesn't matter. So you're going to put a lowering kit or a shorter shock. It's going to diminish the, you know, ability of the suspension to absorb the road. But those guys that are in that category, they really don't care about the way the ride feels.
So these are for guys that are like really short, you know, a short inseam, and they can't touch, they can't have their heels on the ground, and so they feel like, okay, let's lower this thing so I can feel more confident by keeping both my feet planted.
Yeah, and Harley riders in general, they default to what they know, which is like lowering blocks or whatever. There's like these kits that kick back the shock angle, which I do not in any way, you know, recommend or endorse. They're not
garbage.
Good. Yeah, they're garbage. The good news is there's been a lot of movement or, like, you know, innovation in that kind of category, and we'll talk about one specifically, which I dealt with or talked to a customer today about, which is the iRide from Thundermax. So that one is an electronically controlled suspension. One shock is an airbag, and the other one's an actual conventional spring. And you can actually program it to, when you come up to a stop, it'll actually drop.
Okay, that's perfect. Yeah.
And so this particular customer, he's about 5'3" or 4", and, you know, short inseam. And he said, "Hey, this is my issue, but I don't like that height when I'm riding down the road." I go, "Hey, I know what you need. Let me show you." And so that one has 3 different positions: one for street, like city riding, and one for highway riding. So it was a good fit for him. It's not perfect for everyone, but for his, you know, stature of trying to be, you know, low and touch the ground, it's a great product for his situation. So when there's looks or low or height involved, it's the same thing with handlebars. You know, it's like, why are you changing the handlebars? Oh, I like the way that the ape hanger handlebars look. Okay, well, what size do you want? I mean, there's no comfort involved.
The biggest one.
Yeah, 18s, 20s, whatever.
You know, if I can just say something real quick. I get a lot of guys that feel like the bike has to be lower than it really does. There's a lot of guys that come in here, and maybe they're not the most confident, skillful riders, and that's okay. You know, when you go to maybe you're coming from a lighter dirt bike or sport bike or something like that, and you get onto a Harley, and they feel real big and heavy and intimidating, and people really feel like they have to have both of their feet really flat and planted on the ground. And that's not always the case. Sometimes I think rider skill can kind of make up for your lack of height. And so, you know, one of the things that I think Keith kind of alluded to but didn't, you know, expound on it is when you go lower in the suspension, people don't realize you are really diminishing the ride quality of that bike a lot. And so what I see a lot of guys do is they go lower than they need to. Sometimes guys go lower on the bike and they don't really necessarily need it, and they do it, and then they're riding down the freeway at 65 miles an hour, and that thing just turns into a you know, a pogo.
And there's a couple of reasons behind that. We could talk about it. And number one is that when most manufacturers, when they offer a lowered shock, they increase the spring rate. So the springs, it's really like stiff, and because they're trying to they've now diminished their travel of their suspension by half or whatever they have, and they're trying to resist it from bottoming by giving it more spring.
Right.
And so, like, you see these inexpensive, you know, shocks out there that are like really oversprung, and there's no control of the rebound dampening on them. So the suspension's cycling really fast. That's part of it. And, you know, so backing up a little bit, like when guys come to me and ask me like, "Hey, I want to lower my bike," my first question is, "Well, why do you want to lower your bike?" And if it's a comfort thing, I normally will tell them like two things right out of the chute. Do you have the shoes on that you ride in? Number one, because a good pair of boots can make up a big difference from a pair of tennis shoes. So if they ride in tennis shoes, okay, cool. If you have your tennis shoes on now but you normally ride in boots, well, that can make a big difference of your foot placement and how, you know, low you need the bike to get. Number two is your seat. So a seat's a way easier modification than less expensive anyways than a suspension is. So I'll always talk to them about their seat. Hey, what about your seat? Do you need that much seat? Are you willing to sacrifice some, you know, foam to get you down lower? And after we answer those two questions, and if we still need to talk about suspension, then we start talking, you know, what the options are as far as getting the bike lower. I'll try to offer them something more quality than just those kickback devices, which are not good, or like a really inexpensive shock, which is everyone's default. You know, they go for the least expensive, you know, method. And I try to warn them like, hey, the ride quality on this isn't going to be what you're expecting.
Especially you're losing lean angle a lot when you go in canyon roads or the roads in the Alps.
Yeah.
You're gonna scrape boards.
There's a lot more consideration. So there's that in that category. There's those lowering kits, and then there's the air rides everyone wants to talk about, whatever flavor brand you want to talk about. Legends was famous for them for a long time. They still offer them. There's high-low, there's shotgun, there's a million of them. Yeah. Most of them, in my experience, are like modify or basically like a direct transfer from a car air shock, which is a whole different application. Normally there's a spring involved, like a coilover spring or a leaf spring at least, to give it. It's meant to be a booster for those kind of suspensions, and not so much the sole suspending member of a chassis. So those things, they do adjust the height. You can move them around if as you want to, but again, the ride quality is just not what you would want or what you would expect. So I just wanted to get those out of the way because they're pretty easy to explain off. Like if you're in that category, cool. We have stuff to offer you too, but there's really no. What we're more going to focus on is the quality, improving the quality of the ride of your vehicle, and not so much the height.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, Keith, or if you have a different opinion, but usually with the air ride stuff where you can, fill it up or bring it down, I usually tell people that's really good if you have like a low rider and you want to like show off your bike and, slam it down. But if you're just looking for performance and comfort, typically there's better options out there. Yeah. I just feel like on those air rides, you just have more lateral movement, especially going through turns. It feels like the tail end's a little bit looser.
Yeah, not only that, but like so you're filling a bladder with air, right? You have limited control over that. You can like if you were like when you look at the ones that have gauges, the gauge is constantly moving around as it's going down the road. The reason behind that, you don't have control over the actual like inertia and the movement of the members of the chassis. You can only like put it to a certain PSI, but it's not going to stay there. When you hit a bump and something compresses, it's going to increase, and that there's no control over that bladder expansion. So that bladder's just it's like a air balloon. It's just going to get bigger and smaller as the suspension moves. And there's very little way to control that. It depends on the road and what it's going to hit. Now with like a traditional like hydraulic and spring suspension, you can more accurately control what the suspension is going to do. Given a set of parameters or a set of of variables, you can get it a lot closer than just an air suspension that's just doing what just moving bigger and smaller as it needs.
It's gonna be a more static system and ride, less variable.
Yeah,
based on
you can control the road variables more, or how they actually act on the vehicle.
I think the air rides are cool for show bikes because you can lower them when they are in front of the cafe and they look beautiful with the big rear tires and just half an inch of clearance between the rear fender, but. Ride-wise, I think they are no match for other suspension systems. But that's not what they are designed for, because if you want to be beautiful, then you are beautiful, but you have other mishaps maybe.
Yeah.
So, we're going to more focus on that, improving the ride quality, which is the people that are going to really be interested in this are going to be the guys that are wanting to make their bike ride better and feel better and do what they wanted to do, better. So just breaking it down, there's really, two areas we want to talk about. Shock absorbers is one, and they come in, a couple of different, styles and flavors. You have your standard or heavy duty shock, which is normally just like a regular emulsion shock that has a preload adjustment, but really nothing else. You can change the springs on them if you want to, or you can change the height of the spring to give it more tension or less tension for preload. And then moving on from that, there's what we call a piggyback shock, which is like it has a remote reservoir, but it's part of the shock body. It's built into the shock. You see those on a lot of Dynas and Softails even. Actually, the later model Softail, they do more of a remote reservoir situation, which is the next version. Remote reservoir, you hear these terms a lot, where you have like Olin's is famous for them because they're out in the open on the touring bikes. They mount them up high and you can see them real good. But like Wernemont does them too. Wernemont has both piggyback and on the Softails though they run remote. So they run it off the side of the swing arm. So
just real quick, Keith, and we don't have to get into the weeds on this, but explain what that is. I think a lot of times people see those remote reservoirs, and it's kind of like, okay, that looks cool, and that means that it's high end. But what does that really do mechanically for the?
There's extra oil in them normally, and pressure. They're pressurized in some designs to basically like cool the suspension. They really it started from like a racing background.
From the off-road rally cars.
Yeah, exactly. Cars, cars, and any off-road is where it really started, because that suspension's cycling so fast, and it's building up friction and heat, and they need the oil. The oil is the only way to really cool them besides whatever air is getting around them, but they're moving around so quickly that they heat up, and so they need that extra volume of oil to keep them cool, kind of like an engine. You know, when you put in an
extra oil tank,
tank or extra oil pan, it gives you a little extra cooling effect. And then now some of the manufacturers use them to house their adjusting, mechanisms, compression, and rebound dampening and stuff like that. Rebound's more normally on the shock, but more compression dampening. And then some of them are nitrogen charged. It just depends on what technology they're using or what design they decided to go with. So I just wanted to cover that real quick, because a lot of guys have questions like, what does that mean, remote reservoir? What's piggyback mean? I don't understand what all these terms are.
Yeah, so maybe let's start with how someone can determine if they need suspension first of all. And I think I'm going to link a video as well in the top left hand corner as well, probably like right about here. Keith and Jamie and we did a video on how to adjust the Softail suspension, the new monoshock when it came out in 2018. We also did a video,
about
that same
touring,
video. Yeah, how to adjust the suspension on a stock touring bike. So the stock suspension on a Softail and the stock suspension on a touring bike. So check that out. You got to, be realistic about your weight and your passenger weight and adjust it. I would say start there first and, adjust the stock stuff and see and make sure it's dialed in correctly for your weight. And if that still isn't good enough, then should they start to consider aftermarket suspension, Keith?
Yeah, like Stefan was talking about earlier before we started recording, and I mentioned earlier, ride the bike. Let's I normally tell people, let's get the suspension adjusted to you if you haven't already done it, and then go ride it. And then based on that feedback, it'll help me, help me make some recommendations as to where I think you need to go. There's certain, words that people use, like you were talking about pogoing earlier. That's one that commonly comes up, and that's a big indication of, hey, that spring's too much. It's too much preload, or it can be too much preload coupled with not enough control over the rebound dampening, which Legends does a good. They were the first ones that I came in contact with that their Revo A shock has adjustable preload, and then they don't mess with the compression dampening at all, just the rebound dampening. So they're able to slow the cycle rate of the suspension down considerably, which helps when you're going over like those roads we have around here. Like there's a lot of little bumps in them. So like when you talk about the suspension working, you hit the first bump, it's going to try to compress it. So the first thing you're trying to do is control that movement of compression.
When you compress, the spring.
Yeah, and then the second thing you want to control when we talk about rebound is how fast that it's going to try to return to its resting state. And that's, honestly, one of my complaints or one of my, bones about Harley-Davidson suspension is even their premium suspension, they don't control the rebound very well. And it does that kind of choppy pogoing, effect over the same bumps that you'll ride a bike that you can tune the rebound a little bit. It feels completely different.
Yeah, and I feel like they fixed that a lot in the 17 model year when they came out with the Showa dual bending valve. I had a 14 Street Glide, which was the first year of the Rushmore project, and I felt exactly what you were describing at the front end. I felt like the rebound wasn't really good. Like the wheel would like almost bounce, especially when you're coming from a standstill, and it wouldn't keep that contact patch, the tire against the asphalt. And then in the 17 model year when they came out with the new Showa dual bending valve system, I feel like that has a lot better controlled rebound.
Yeah, dual bending valve you're talking about is fork stuff, but they did improve the shock also.
Oh, okay, you're talking about shock. Okay.
So they did actually I think it was 17. They improved the shock. Actually, they made the body more robust, and they actually made the spring a lot better. It made it brought it more in the usable range. Before it was a little bit too soft, I guess. It was moving a little too too much. And so the later model, like 17 liter shocks, are far superior to what they had before.
But still, if you're happy with the stock suspension, then just leave it. If it's set properly and you're fine, then leave it. I rode 5 years at 2011 Road King Classic, and I was happy.
Yeah.
And then I started to think, well, I'm not happy anymore. So what do I need to change?
Yeah.
So this was on you had a Softail Slim, right?
No, that's the one my wife rides. Okay. I had a Road King Classic.
Oh, I'm sorry, you said that.
And then I converted it to Öhlins, but nevertheless, the stock suspension for the first years, it was okay for my style of riding. And then I got more confident. I started to ride a little bit faster, still going old man speed.
Yeah.
But then I realized, no, I need to change something. I want to change something.
Sure.
So,
and that's a big point, I think. And it's something I don't want to jump ahead, but we'll get into. You know, a lot of these guys, they'll buy this over-the-top suspension because it's the priciest and it looks the coolest, and you can brag to your friends about it. But is your riding ability, can you push your bike hard enough to where you actually utilize the full benefit of that suspension? And for some of these guys, I'd say probably not. You know, some of these guys aren't riding hard enough to get the full benefit out of their inverted front end, you know, Öhlins shocks.
Yeah, but they like the style.
Yeah,
so that's the whole point.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it does look cool, you know. Öhlins
definitely does.
It looks very cool. It looks performance, and Öhlins done a great job of marketing, you know, and they sponsor a lot of riders and racing circuits and stuff. And they have that gold color that's very distinctive and like kind of, you know, gets you that feeling of like, wow, that thing must be really cool because it's a really cool color. And they're great. But I guess the point there is like most guys, you're right, Matt, probably aren't riding that suspension to its potential because it has an immense potential. Yeah. But my point with any of those guys would be like, let's make sure it's adjusted to you. No matter what kind of riding you're doing, if you decide to change, like, so you're like the biggest like advantage to a really high end suspension like that is I ride like this on the street all week, and then I go to the track on the weekend, and I need to stiffen my suspension up. I need to change all the settings. They're crazily adjustable that way. 3-way adjustable. They got everything covered that you can imagine. And then you have your different suspension setting for the track. You go to the track, dial in your adjusters, dial in your preload, and you're good to go.
So that's kind of one of the features that you get when you spend more money on your suspension is that it then becomes adjustable.
Adjustability,
I think, you know, generally speaking, the less expensive suspension you don't have that adjustment ability. And so if you're someone that rides kind of the same all the time, that isn't that guy that rides normal on the street and then goes to the track and needs to, you know, dial up the stiffness on it. If you're not one of those guys, then maybe you don't need to spend, you know, the money and get the very best.
Take the Softail Slim. So it's a single rider bike. So if you're not changing your way of riding, it just needs to be set perfectly to your type of riding, and then there's no need for upgrades. And the aftermarket companies hardly offer anything for those Softails because the customers don't need it.
Usually guys aren't like trying to like rip on their Softail Slim through the cans. I mean, it's already pretty low bike. Talk a little bit, Stefan, because I like to hear, you know, from a consumer, like a customer perspective, kind of like your progression through your different bikes. And you know, you've got a 19 CVO Road Glide now, which is kind of the holy grail of Harley.
The red pepper, so the unicorn. I'm so lucky to get it. And it was before COVID, of course, because in 2020, I wouldn't have spent the money for it. But last year it was okay. And now it's in the garage, so we're going to keep it. Well, it started a long time ago. I started riding Harley about 12 years ago, mostly rental bikes. And during my layovers here in the United States, it was beautiful. I got used to Harley. I got used to the way of riding a Harley, which is different than riding a motorcycle, just to be honest. It's a different way, and I don't want to miss it anymore. And then in 2011, I bought my own Road King. And beautiful bike. I did a lot of customizing. I went to your store before this whole YouTube thing was up the market. we were on a family vacation. We just left LAX with a rental car towards Big Bear Lake. And then after 1 hour of intense LA traffic, I saw the Laidlaw Harley-Davidson sign. I said, okay, girls, we're going to stop there. Oh, no, come on, Daddy, don't do that. And it was just a Saturday when you had an open house, a nice show, and my girls won a Barbie out of the tombola, and I had
raffle, that's cool.
And I had about 2 hours of undisturbed Harley shopping here.
There you go.
And that's what I remembered when I saw the YouTube videos. So, and I mentioned again, I was quite happy with my 2011 Road King. But after a couple of years, I wanted to improve something. And by that time, the only thing my dealer recommended was Öhlins. So not the golden stuff, which was way above the top considering the price and the style I wanted to keep. I wanted to retain the stock look of the Road King Classic. So I changed the rear shocks, normal ones without piggybacks, and did some cartridges for the front. I did it in my garage, thought it was the first time that I upgraded the suspension, and it was a really big improvement. It took me quite a while to find the perfect setting for my way of riding, doing a lot of adjustments. Now I had to remove both bags because they had been symmetrical shocks in the rear.
Right.
That was kind of a pain. And when my wife or daughter wanted to join me, I had to find the setting for the two-up riding. And I had to remember when it was in short notice, what's the difference?
Yeah.
So I forgot it a lot of times, and then, oh no, it's still...
You can feel it right away.
Yeah, it's still on two-up. I need to stop in order to get it set right. But it was a beautiful set. And then 1 or 2 years later, I got to know this new German company. Well, it's in business for several years, but not for Harley-Davidson. They made a lot of aftermarket shocks for all different bikes, metric bikes, BMW. And they had this new system with the leveling damping control. The automatic leveling, which they took over from the car industry, that automatically adjusts to the load of the bike. And I thought, oh, that's
something new.
That's magic.
Yeah.
Is there any electronics? The same thing that you asked me when I first introduced it. No, there's no electronics. Does it work? I don't know. It's a lot of money.
Sounds gimmicky when you don't know the
and
sign.
It's a lot of money. Normally you have one shot when you do an upgrade, because I had the Öhlins shot and that was it. But a friend of mine has the same bike, and he said, well, I want to give it a try. And
so this is when you still had the Road King, or this is on your Road Glide?
That was the Road King of my friend.
Okay.
So the first bike that we actually transformed onto Wilburs. And by that time, it was already time for a new bike. So sometimes it is time for a new bike. It doesn't make sense at all, but I was kind of fed up with the black of the Road King and all the nice chrome. And when I rode in the rain, it took me 3 hours to get everything shiny again, which it has to be. And I saw the pictures of the new red pepper CVO Road Glide, and a friend of mine had the gunship gray one, and I was able to ride it for 1.5 hours in the Alps, and I thought, it's a cool bike. It's a totally different style. My wife says that's not a Harley, it's a grandpa bike, but I say I don't care. It has to fit the rider has to love it. And so I thought, well, okay, how can I finance it? I need to sell my Road King, which the seller was quite happy about, the suspension upgrade with Öhlins. And then I signed the contract for the red pepper, and I already ordered a set of Wilburs before the bike was even here.
So
did you ride it stock ever, or okay?
That's a good point too. Like I noticed, like a lot of guys that get tuned into the suspension world, they either try to transfer their suspension from one bike to the other, or they know right away that they want the suspension done on the bike. Once you're on that track, like there's no going back.
And I rode the gunship, which was the stock suspension. It was in the Alps, canyon roads, a really, really bad surface, so the speed limit was 40 miles because of the rough road, and I needed to stand up in the saddle because the Road Glide CVO, it's a style point. With a 20-inch front wheel, there is hardly any suspension travel left. And for the customers out there, we all know it, but we like the style. So, but it was just not my kind of suspension. So. And I got experience about the Wilburs already by that time. So I ordered the kit. I had it in the garage. It was waiting for 5 months because my CVO was one of the last ones shipped to Europe. I got it in May, and it was released in September. So quite a long time to wait for the bike. And I just picked it up at the dealership, rode it home stock, and the first thing in the evening until 3 in the morning, I converted the pipes to legal European flap-operated pipes, and I converted the suspension.
Yeah.
And from that day on, it's still not an adventure bike, which is not supposed to be. But it's just my perfect bike. And that's all what you ask for as a rider.
Yeah.
Yep.
Stefan brought up a couple of good points I want to amplify, because this is some questions that a lot of people have. They think that they're, like Öhlins is we keep talking about them because they've been around for a long time. There's degrees of suspension in between, like a stock suspension and the high end inverted, remote reservoir shock setup. There's cartridge inserts, which he talked about. There's other shocks that are offer other things than the big adjustments and everything like that. So there's pretty much every manufacturer has degrees of suspension. It's not like one or the other. There's
some are adjustable.
They all offer different functions. Like there's different, as you go up in kind of price or grade, then you get more adjustability. That's a good point. And kind of goes to one thing that we really try to emphasize, which is pick a suspension that works for your predicament or your riding style, and also your budget. Budget's a big thing. Like suspension could be expensive. When you convert one of these, like the most expensive ones are when you convert one of these touring bikes into an inverted Öhlins front end. You're talking about triple trees. You're talking about forks. You're talking about brake componentry and all kinds of stuff.
$7,000-8,000.
Yeah, $7,000 or $8,000, just in the front end.
You're financing a second bike there for a new set of forks.
And like you just said earlier, not everyone that has them is riding them to their potential. If you just want to have it, then let's get it. But there's a lot of things in between where you're at, not where you're at when you get the bike stock and that big of an upgrade that are less expensive and can do just as good for you to if you're not riding that track or that super fast style that you don't really need, that you can get a less expensive suspension that'll do everything you want it to do and still feel great and not spend all that money on it. So I want to make sure to make a point of that. And Stefan was talking about a little bit when he's talking about his Road King. There's a lot of inserts out there now for the fork. And like Matt, you were saying, the dual bending valve was a big upgrade for the stock suspension. It helps it work a lot better. We could talk at length about that thing. There's a lot of like technology, and there's a lot to understand when you talk about how that valve works, which we can discuss in the chat if people want to talk about it. We're not going to talk about that here. But there's a lot of those insert, cartridges now that are, some of them use oil and some of them use nitrogen and some of them use internal dampening, and you don't really need much oil only to lubricate them. Every company has theirs. Like Öhlins has their Nix 22 or Nix 30s for the inverted fork. Wilbur's, they go with the spring, which is a great way to do it. It's inexpensive, but you can control a lot of the front end action. And they're already taking advantage of the dual bending valve. They're leaving it in place. Yeah,
you have all the good components.
Yeah.
You just add a very precise spring to it, which is more expensive than the stock spring, because all the stock things, they need to have a certain quality. They need to serve all different kinds of riders, and they need to serve a price point in order to make the bike not more expensive. So, if the manufacturer chooses a much more expensive spring and a different oil, then you already get a pretty good improvement.
Yeah, so they pair up a really quality spring with a really quality oil.
That's tailored for your weight. Right. I think that's really important. When I wanted the Wilburs.
Not the front spring.
Okay, the rear?
The rear is tailored, but the front is always the same, as your weight doesn't have that much effect on the front.
Yeah,
on a Harley, because you're sitting laid back, so the weight on the front is pretty similar, even if you're riding two up.
Yeah, Harleys are rear weight biased. Most of their weight's towards the rear, which is why there's always so much discussion and so much concentration on the shock, because it's the more active component of the front end or the suspension. The front end absorbs a little bit of the initial shock, but the shock in the rear shock absorber absorbs the majority of the actual suspension action, on the Harleys. And weight bias is another factor that a lot of people don't talk about. You see that more prevalent in the in the Dynas that raise the rear end up, or the Softails now they're raising the rear end of them, or the performance bagger market where they're running extended shock lengths in the back to kind of try to even out the chassis a little more. And then when you're doing that, you're putting more demand on the front. So you're going to want to, beef that up a little bit more and make it a little bit more adjustable and compliant, because you're going to need it, because now you're evening out the load of the chassis between the front and the back. But like Stefan's saying, the rear the Harleys are more rear weight bias. Yeah. So that's why, I said earlier, there's no silver bullet, but not that this is a Wilbur's commercial, but theirs is the closest to an all-around, suspension upgrade that you can do that's user-friendly, that's adjusts itself hydraulically, that and I didn't really have too much experience with them. We put a couple in, but I wasn't really involved in them until the last one we did on your friend's bike. Yeah. And Jamie, who's our shop foreman, he's a race tech certified, suspension tech. He's a off-road racer, off-road dirt bike rider, and more than that, he's very demanding of products. He's really honest about his opinions about stuff. So he was doing that job coincidentally, and so I said, hey man, I want to hear your feedback. Like, what do you think about this? I know we've put a couple of them in, but you've never done one. He's like, yeah, I understand, what they're doing, but let's see how it feels, because for him, that's the ultimate test. And I know he told you too, but when he came back, I said, what do you think? He's like, dude, that is a very, very nice riding suspension, and a great upgrade for anyone's, a bike, and very user friendly. And it does exactly what they say it does. It hydraulically evens out the ride height. You don't have to worry about all that stuff. Once you put it in and, get the preload set up, you're pretty much good to go. I mean,
and it doesn't matter if you're riding 1 up or 2 up. I was so disappointed when we did the install and the video down in the shop. It was the only day that it was raining. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was so limited with my schedule to get here. And we just missed doing the 2 up riding for the video. Yeah, because it was raining. There was no way to get the video done that day. And then when I saw the video a couple of days later, I thought, oh.
Matt missed one of the most important parts about the Wilburs, and that is the self-adjustment, which you told that to me, but, I have so much information coming in and out of my brain all the time.
No offense. And then I just happened to be here 1 week later, and we met you at the shop, and I said, well, Matt, cool video, but you missed the important thing.
Let's try again.
No, and then just on the way to the dealership, I thought, well, we could have demonstrated it just in the showroom, just hopping on the rear a couple of times and then measuring again and see, it has lifted. Yeah. But I didn't have that idea the week before. Yeah. And then you wouldn't have missed it.
Their video on their site, actually, I can't remember if the audio is in German. I think it might be. But regardless, they do a really good job of demonstrating that. They actually have 2 people on the bike, and there's a ruler on the side end with a pointer. And it's moving around, but you can see very clearly that when they first get on the bike, it dips down pretty good. And then when they start moving,
after like 5 or 6 compressions,
it gradually moves up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and back to where it initially was, which, like my point there is, for a person that wants to upgrade their stock suspension, they like the ride height the way it is, and they want to make it feel good and compliant and give you that feeling of I'm stuck to the road. That's a great suspension upgrade. I mean, it's a good setup
if they want to retain the stock look.
Yeah,
because it's nothing fancy about it.
Correct.
It's hidden behind the bags. Because it's not the most beautiful suspension.
Yeah.
So it has to be hidden behind the bags. That's why they only offer it for touring and not for Sportsters or the old Dynas, because it just doesn't look right if there are no bags.
Yeah.
And the fork looks exactly the same. I just right now, as I'm starting the business, I put some Wilbur stickers on the fork in order to make people know, there's something different.
Because otherwise, powered by Wilbur's.
Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't see it, and that's kind of the nice thing, because I'm not the performance bagger guy, so I want to have the stock look. I do respect those guys with the high performance upgrades, and I like to watch those inverted forks, but they're just way too expensive for my bike, and I don't like the style.
You don't ride to the limits that require you to have something like
you shouldn't have mentioned that.
I mean, I said it the nicest way I could, and majority of the time I don't either. So I don't, but if someone gave me one for free, I wouldn't turn it away. That's for sure.
But
I would love to have that.
For a street motorcycle, a touring rider, the guy that's gonna, doesn't want to have to worry about adjusting a bunch of things and changing ride heights and things like that. I mean, that's a great, that's where that product hits the niche. Like it's for the guy that's just wants an upgrade to make it feel better, that's going to be riding on the street. That kit, because it's a balanced front and rear setup, is great. And
that's key too, Keith. I think, and I think we should give some people some practical knowledge here where they can kind of make a self-assessment of what they have currently, and if they feel like they should upgrade, and what does that upgrade look like if they feel like they need to make an upgrade. So I think the first thing that a lot of people do if they just want to improve the comforts, as you kind of talked about, is we'll talk about the touring chassis. It's changed the rear the shocks. Yeah. And a lot of guys buy the Street Glides and the Road Glide Specials. That's the #1 best-selling touring bike. And what people don't realize is that is Harley-Davidson's lowered touring shock.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
As opposed to like the Road King, not the Special, but the regular Road King has the standard touring shock, like the Limiteds, and the Road Glide Limited has the full travel. And a lot of guys get on those bikes and they aren't really happy with the suspension travel. Well, Harley's trying to accomplish a couple things. They're trying to accomplish a low seat height so a lot of people can fit on the bike, and they want that cool custom bagger look where it's a low profile.
And it has to be low,
and so that's kind of a style thing over a functional thing there. And I personally don't like that. I like to have the best comfort. I ride with my wife frequently to where I like to have the adjustability aspect of the Wilburs. And so, I've done the Fox shocks, which I got a really nice bump, from that. The stock suspension on the Street Glide is 12 inches, and the Fox bumped it up to a 13-inch. And, that helped out a lot considerably.
Yeah.
But going back to the point you made, Keith, there's no substitute to having a front and rear suspension designed together where they both work in harmony with one another.
Yeah, but it's getting more expensive. You have to pay for it.
Yep.
You got to pay for it.
If you're budget limited, then just changing the rear shocks
makes a big difference.
And if you go for more improved suspension, then you have to spend more money, and then there's nothing better than a balanced full suspension front and rear.
And because people like to hear prices, so you can get a nice pair of rear shocks, like a Fox or a Ross Wernimon or like a Legends. You can get those for about $800 or $900 for just a set of rear shocks. Now you go to something like the Wilburs, which is the full package. You get the front and the rear. You're looking now at about $1,900 US.
18 before tax. I think it's $1,790, something like that.
Okay, about $1,800. And
it's a long way to get it from Germany over to here.
Which is actually, but in the scope of comparing apples to apples, and in the scope of comparing that to another suspension you're going to buy that's going to do the same thing that it does or similar, with a little more input. Like a front end cartridge, for instance, is like $1,200 or $1,400. Like from Legends, for instance, is like a $1,400 cartridge, and then the shocks, $800 or $900. So do the math there. You're well over $2,000 for the same kind of upgrade that you're going to experience for $1,800 or $1,900, a few $100 less. With the
Wilburs, you're just looking at the spring that you change in the front forks and the fork oil, and then you have the full shocks in the rear. Yeah. And so part of the reason why like a full Legends front and rear setup is much more expensive is because now we're talking about a cartridge.
Yeah, because the front is much more expensive. But the simple Wilbur spring doesn't look too fancy, but it works so well as it is so balanced with the rear ones. But once again, you have to look for what your budget is, what you're trying to get, and then pick the suspension that you like, because it's your bike and you have to like the bike. No matter what brand it is, if it just fulfills all your needs, then go with the brand you're happy with.
Yeah, and Stefan and I were talking about this earlier too. One thing I did want to mention, because there's a lot of people that are, depending on your situation, if your bike's new, then you don't have to worry about these items as much. But as a bike ages, as the miles go on, the springs start to, get less tension, the bushings inside the forks and the springs wear, and things start to wear. And you get this like declining progression over time of suspension performance that, you might not even notice because it's so gradual. So like, you know, a bike that has like 50,000 miles on it.
Yeah, you get used to it. You're riding it every day. You get used to it as it's declining.
Yeah,
it happens slowly.
It's kind of slowly, and then one day you notice it, and then your first, you know, as a customer, your first reaction is, "Oh, I need to upgrade my suspension," and that might be true, but you need to pay attention to the maintenance first, like your engine mounts. Some of the older bikes have rubber engine mounts. You need to make sure that they're in good shape. You need to make sure that your swing arm bearings are not, you know, compromised in any way. Like they'll get compromised from if you pressure wash your bike a lot, or you ride it really hard, they can wear out. The wheel bearings is another one that people don't consider, that they wear and they get messed up and they give you a weird feeling.
Yeah, everything has to be tight before you change the components of the suspension. Yeah.
And the number one thing is, and I've mentioned it before here, and I mention it as many times as I can, is tires and proper tire pressure.
Right.
Like 90% of guys that present to us like, hey, I have a handling problem with my bike, a wobble or whatever, 9 times out of 10 I'll go out there with the air pressure checker, and it's at least 10 pounds low. I had one today. Guy rode in and he hadn't ridden his bike in a while. He's like, my bike feels really weird. Well, guess what? He's got like 10 pounds of air in the front tire and about 20 in the rear, which is way lower than it ever should be.
Perfect for off-roading.
Yeah. So you
got to have a tire, a compressor. If you're a Harley rider that gets out frequently, you got to have an air compressor in your garage.
Yeah, the tire is an active member of the suspension. It's the number one member of the suspension that's touching the road. So I mention that only because, like, you know, I don't like to lead people down a road that they don't need to go down if they don't need to go down it. But those are things we check out first when someone says, hey, I have a suspension problem, or I think I need to upgrade my suspension. Well, how many miles are on your bike? Let's talk about it, you know, things like that. And then, you know, once we establish those things are good, then we can start talking about, you know, what we want to do. What's your budget? What's your intent? What are you going to do with the bike? How do you ride? Do you ride two up? Do you ride solo? All these questions that start to come to the surface when you start talking about, you know, how are we going to upgrade this guy's suspension?
You know, talk about maintenance too. I mean, they changed every 10,000 miles is when you're supposed to change the fork oils, right?
They changed that more than a couple years back.
50,000 miles, I think it is right 50?
Now. So that's the motor company's stance on it. And I don't know where Stefan stands on it because we didn't talk about it. But my personal
change it earlier.
Yeah,
I made a nice video about one of my first customers changing his 2010 Ultra to a full Wilbur suspension, and he had 40,000 miles on the bike. And I told him, well, we might need to change the bushings of the front fork as well and do a complete fork job. Yeah, okay, yeah, we can do that. Shall I get the parts? They are pretty expensive in Germany. OEM Harley-Davidson fork rebuild kits. No, I know somebody. I will get everything. And then we started to disassemble it, make the video, and then he just got the seals but not the bushings. And the oil was so dirty and ugly, it smelled. So it was the time to change it. And then I saw, oh no, he has just the seals. Okay, I want to finish the video, and then I put the parts of the fork together and thought, well, maybe we can do it, and then clack, clack, clack. No, I'm not going to do it. I said, we stop here, showstopper, get the proper parts, and we continue tomorrow. I'm not going to upgrade your suspension because you won't feel it. Right. It will be still the same.
It doesn't lose shimmy in there. Yeah.
And he was so happy. He took the bike out in the rain. When we finished the next day, he made the test ride. He was smiling all over his face.
Yeah,
but so at least changing the bushings would have already made a big improvement, and the rest was done by the new suspension.
Yeah, so like Stefan said, like, so here, you know, there's a difference between like Harley-Davidson's recommendations and shop policy. So like this is a good, we won't go into it deep, but this is a good discussion for later about service pricing and stuff like that. So like I as a service manager set the shop policies. So we, at 20,000 miles is when we include into our 20K services a fork oil change. And for that exact reason, because we've taken them apart at 50,000 miles and they are wasted. I mean, completely wasted. The oil's way beyond its usable life. The bushings are completely worn. And yeah, I depart from Harley on that one. They did that quite a few years ago because they were taking some heat on the marketing side for, you know, price of riding a Harley was in the consumer's eyes was very expensive. So this is when you see them increase the interval on the front end, which is an expensive, you know, service, and also in, you know, recommending that, hey, you can let your transmission oil go 10,000 miles and you can let your primary oil go 10,000 miles, or actually transmission oil like 20,000. They say now. We don't do that. We change them. We change those oils every service, and then we change the fork oil, you know, basically half the interval or better than half the interval that they recommend, just because of what we've seen in our, you know, history. And with the late model touring bikes, you know, at 50,000, they want you to disassemble the front end, and they no longer have a fitting to lubricate the fork neck. You have to take it apart and hand pack the grease and everything, which isn't as big of a deal. I mean, the bearings are much larger now, and they support a lot more, you know, duty cycle. So we don't see as much as we used to back in the day of, you know, messed up actual neck bearings. But the fork oil for sure is a big one that needs to be changed.
That's one that gets neglected. You have a lot of guys that do their own maintenance, like change all the fluids, but you don't see them taking apart their front forks.
Yeah, and by Harley's,
come on, here's one.
Okay, okay. Well, you're the exception.
Okay.
By Harley's, you know, by Harley's rule and standards, that's okay. They'll allow that. But then again, they don't cover wearable items. So like if, you know, something happens, if your bike's still in 2-year warranty at 50,000 miles and you take your front end apart and realize that the bushings are worn, that's not a warrantable item. It's a wear item. They're going to not cover that. So there's no responsibility on the manufacturer side by extending the interval. Nothing's going to per se break, but it's not the best representation of the way the suspension can work, you know, and yeah, it's anybody that's in that world of service and, you know, and suspension technology, that's too long. That oil can't handle that.
And especially on the Rushmore Tourers, it's compared to the older ones, it's so much easier to change the fork oil. Yeah. It was really a big job on the old Road King with the old 41 millimeter forks. Yeah. It took me hours. Yeah. Well, I'm not a professional, so maybe we have to subtract 2 hours. But on the new ones, it's so much easier with the 49 millimeter fork. It saves so much working time.
Yeah, they made
removing the fork.
Made the fasteners much more accessible. Yeah. So like the pinch bolts and stuff that you have to use to take the fork off, as well as they did a good job of like cutting down the amount of hardware on the fender and whatnot, and it's a lot easier. The wheel spacing is a lot easier. You know, like a lot of the bikes have ABS now, so that was a common mistake. People would mix up the wheel spacers because one was long and one was short, and they get them on the wrong side, and then their brakes are all mashed up on one side. That doesn't happen as much anymore. So they simplified the process of disassembling the fork. So there's really no good reason not to, you know, to do that. It's just something that needs to get done. I mean, yeah, we do it every 20,000 miles, and even at that, depending on the use of the bike and, you know, what kind of weight it's riding around with, the oil is questionable at 20,000 miles, you know. So, but yeah, back in the day it was 10, like you said, you know, on the 41 millimeter front ends, and, you know, earlier, you know, vehicles it was 10,000 miles.
Yeah, I think on my old BMW GS, so the 1904 model year, was the fork oil, I think, was once a year or every 2 years. Yeah. So it was pretty easy to change, but nevertheless, it was a very short interval. Yeah. In order to make sure to have the proper suspension. Yeah.
So,
you know, we talk a little bit about, you know, getting the right suspension that's tailored for you, your body type, your weight, and, you know, the type of riding you're going to be doing. I think it's important too to kind of talk about, you know, the fact that, you know, the stock suspension. I got a comment yesterday on one of my videos, and, you know, people, you know, asked me the question, you know, I wish you could just buy a Harley and not have to upgrade the suspension right away. And I just tell people all the time, you don't have to upgrade the suspension. The suspension on especially the soft tails now, and even the touring bikes, is really, really good. I mean, it's high-end quality stuff. You're not getting crap there at all. But, you know, a lot of the stuff that I feature on my channel, you know, especially, are guys that, you know, I highlight their bike for a reason. It's because they're in the top, you know, 5% of handling and performing bikes on the road. Yeah. If it was a stock bike that showed up to the shop, I wouldn't do a highlight video on it. That doesn't mean you got to spend all this money on suspension. But the point I wanted to make is to have a bike and the suspension that's set up specifically for you is huge. And, you know, Harley-Davidson ships all the same suspension out to everybody for a guy that weighs 150 pounds and for the guy that weighs 280 pounds, you know, who's going to be riding with his 130-pound wife, you know. So it's hard to any manufacturer in the world to ship a suspension that's going to be good for the entire gamut, the whole spectrum of riders out there.
And that works in Alaska and in Texas or Arizona.
Great point.
Yeah, and so, for those that don't know, Harley's suspensions made by Showa forever and ever and ever, amen. They're not a retailer, really. They're more of a, like a manufacturer style of company. They deal in large volumes and stuff. But like we discussed this earlier, Matt, like if you, and it alludes back to the last video we did with Nick about bike pricing. So we talked a little bit about componentry and research and stuff like that. Harley could put a different suspension on with much more capabilities, but then the bike's going to be a $20,000 bike's going to be a $30,000 bike real quick. And then people are going to be like, why is this bike $30,000? Well, hey, you wanted the $10,000 Olin suspension on it. There you go.
No, I didn't want it. That's exactly what's starting that.
Yeah. So it's a compromise. Like the suspension's pretty darn good for a stock suspension nowadays. It's pretty good. Can it be better? Yes, it can be. Is it good for most people? Yeah, it's probably good for most guys, but not everyone is not a universal fit. Like I say, and there's no silver bullet. So, sometimes guys ride in a style that the stock suspension can't suit their needs, and then they need to make those upgrades. So yeah, that kind of it's a double-edged sword. So you can make it better, but it's gonna be more expensive, just like we were talking about earlier.
And not everybody needs it. A good example is a friend of mine, a colleague. He's riding a 1988 Electroglide, and he just changed the mufflers, and that's all. And the rest is stock with the cassette deck and everything, and he's happy with it. He's just riding it the way it's supposed to be. He's happy with it. I don't want to sell him a different suspension. I don't know if there is one available at the moment, but he is just happy with it.
Yeah.
And, so don't change it if you're happy with it.
Yeah.
When you go and buy aftermarket suspension, they usually have their lighter shock and they have their heavier shock.
A lot of times.
If you get like I mentioned, I had the Reservoir in I've had Fox suspension as well, and they have their shock that goes up to about 250 pounds, and they have their shock that maybe it's 230, I can't remember, and they have their one that is anything heavier than that.
Yeah.
Well, that's because they're, like we've been saying, there's people that have different needs. And Harley-Davidson, unfortunately, you can't click the heavy or the light box when you buy your Harley-Davidson. So how are they ever going to design a suspension that's good in all different applications? And when I got my Wilburs from Stefan here, I gave them. I mean, you guys are really precise. You want the exact weight of the rider with their gear on, the weight of the passenger with the gear on, and what percentage of the time you ride with the passenger. So we're talking about a suspension that is very tailor-made to your weight, and there's really no substitute to that.
But you can still change it when you sell the bike, because I just had the problem with another customer. I went to a dealership to introduce myself, and then you're with Wilburs? No, I'm not with Wilburs. I'm trying to sell them. It's freelance. Yeah, but we had a customer. He has a problem. Can I give you the phone number? And the customer just bought a 2013 Street Glide, so the old frame, the old suspension, and it wasn't hardly doing any suspension travel at the rear. And he made a picture of the warranty card with the spring rate that was manufactured, and that's a regular kind of shock. So that was before Wilburs invented the self-leveling system. And then I talked to the customer support, and they figured out, well, he got a really, really stiff spring rate on the rear. And the new owner, he's a very light guy, so about 150, 160 pounds only. And so they just sent him 2 new springs with a soft spring rate, and I just got a message, oh, he's so happy with the new rear shocks. So you have to keep that in mind. If it's tailor-made for you, it has to be easily adapted when you sell the bike one day. Yeah, and if you just have the heavy-duty shocks because you are 250 pounds or more, and then you sell it to a more athletic guy, he won't be happy with the bike.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Great point, Matt. I'm glad you brought that up, which is what I wanted to put out there, which is if you're in the market for suspension and you go talk to a shop or anyone and they don't ask you those questions, like how often do you ride 2-up? What kind of riding do you do? What's your weight? If they don't ask you those questions, be very leery of that.
Yeah.
Because those are important questions to know when you're trying to set up a suspension for a customer, you need to know those things. Otherwise, you're never going to even have an idea what their expectations are. Yep. And so that, and like if they don't offer to show you how to adjust your $1,000 shock that you just bought, or they don't know how to adjust it, go somewhere else.
You're not going to get the full benefit of that shock. No. There's a lot of guys that, they come in, they ask me, hey, Matt, I want to upgrade the ride. What suspension should I buy? Yeah. And it's like, well, how much time do you have, man? Because, we can talk about this for a while.
I feel so bad for a lot of customers, because, we can only control what happens in our own building, but I come into contact with them all the time. They have, real expensive shocks, $900 to $1,000 shocks. They're great adjustable Legends, Ornament, whatever you want to call it.
And yet they've never adjusted them once.
Yeah, I had a guy just the other day come in, he's a converted customer from another dealer, and he came in and I noticed he had Legends shocks on his bike. And I go, how do you like the Legends? He's like, dude, honestly, I was going to ask you about that. Can you help me adjust them? I'm like, you bought these? Wait a minute. Yeah, wait a minute. They didn't adjust them for you? And he's like, no, I have no. I was like, oh, man, come on. Yeah. So I said, hey, when you come pick up, we were servicing his bike. When you come pick up, let me know you're coming, and I'll spend some time with you, and we'll set up your suspension. We set him up, and he lives in Acton, actually. And he rode home, and he called me right back right away. Dude, that felt so much better. Thank you so much for taking the time.
That's rad.
But that's my point. Like, there's a lot of shops out there, unfortunately, that are selling these products because they, make a money, but they're not spending the time to actually inform the customer and actually send them with a card like, hey, because he doesn't ride too up often, but I knew his wife rode with him every once in a while. I go, hey, here's what you're going to want to do before you get your wife on the bike. You want to grab this spring and give it, this amount of preload, and here's the, difference. And he's like, oh, great. And he put it in his tour pack, and he was good to go. And, but yeah, knowing that kind of stuff and trying to service a customer is very important, especially, like I said, if they're not asking any of the questions or they're not teaching you how to work your own suspension, that I would be worried about that.
You can spend all the money in the world and it's not adjusted properly. It's just like, it goes back to the same old thing. You can have the tool, but if you don't know how to use the tool correctly, then it really doesn't do much for you.
But you mentioned tools too. That was one thing, before I forget about it. Sometimes, the shock these days, it's a little more rare. Most of them you can do with your hand. But certain ones require spanner wrenches and special tools to not damage the componentry when you're adjusting them. And so that's a good point to make, when you're having that conversation of how do I adjust my suspension? Do I need a tool for it? So you have that tool available when you need it. Most shocks come with
a tool, because the more expensive ones, they have to come with a tool. It's part of the package.
Yeah. Even the Harley ones, like on when they changed on the 48 to their premium rear suspension. Yep. They had that little spanner wrench underneath the seat. Remember?
Yep. A 16 model year.
Just a silly little steel thing that you put in there and able to unlock the suspension and make the adjustments to it. Yep. So the tools aren't expensive, but they're necessary to actually make the suspension adjustments.
And on the Softails right now, you've got 3 different adjustment types. You've got the one like on the Fat Boy and like the Heritage, where you have the external preload knob there, and they have it on the Sport Glide as well. So that could be considered a little bit more premium because you could do it on the fly where you don't need a tool to do it. But then the other two, you have to take the seat off, and one is hydraulic, and the Heritage is actually a hydraulic adjustment.
Yeah. The Fat Bob and the
Fat Bob, the Fat Boy.
Yeah, the Fat Bob and the Fat Boy.
Sport Glide.
And the Sport Glide all have the
external knob. Yeah.
And then like the Low Rider, the Low Rider S, the
Slim.
The Slim.
Street Bob. The Slim and the Heritage are both the hydraulic adjuster.
Right.
And then the Street Bob, like the Slim, they have a wrench. You have to adjust it. So anyways, in the touring bikes, thank goodness, have just a knob now, which makes it easy. You don't need a tool on the side of the road if you want to adjust it on the fly. Right. But I think the takeaway here is, most of the time there's a chart that gives you your weight and how many turns or what position you want the preload to be at. And you got to familiarize yourself with that.
Yeah, every manufacturer has them. They normally come with the shock, when in the box. And if you just never open the box, there's a lot of guys just don't care about their stock shocks. They'll leave them at the dealership and they never take the box home. They're all on their websites. You can access them and print them or download them to your phone or whatever. But that helps out a lot when you're trying to like adjust your suspension on the fly or on your own. And then understanding how these all work. Mostly it's preload that people are talking about. Mm-hmm. Once you get your compression and rebound on those kind of shocks that are, tunable, you don't normally move them much unless you're changing your scenario as far as like, road riding or track riding or whatever the case may be. So.
Sorry, guys, I can't follow you. I'm just out of adjusting shocks. Just kidding. But for the Wilburs, the initial adjustment needs to be precise.
Yeah.
Because otherwise the system can't work. So what you're talking about, adjusting the shocks there, needs to be done in the first place. And as well, if a dealership installs the Wilbur set without letting you sit on the bike to do the initial adjustment, then you better go to another dealership.
Flag. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, there's every suspension system has its, positive points. And
and its own special things to consider.
Yep. Yeah, and, that's important. So, that's like I was saying earlier, the Wilburs is good, once you initially have it set up, it self-adjusts after that, and you don't really have to worry much about it. It's kind of super user-friendly where you don't have to think much about it.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I go home, I'm riding solo, I ride home from work, and then my wife and I want to jump on the bike together and go down to the coast or something. I don't have to make any adjustments to the Wilburs, and it's just going to self-adjust, and it works. I was actually kind of surprised. But
it was Tony's good job to make a very good initial adjustment. Otherwise, it would still work, but it wouldn't work that good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess we should spend a little bit of time. I kind of made a short list of, the manufacturers I know that are out there and kind of gave a, point about each one that's, a positive point, including Harley, their factory upgrade, suspension. It doesn't compare well to what's out there nowadays, but it is still good. It's an upgrade from where the stock, suspension is. It's funny because the Harley rep was here a couple years ago when they first came out with their new premium suspension, and just so happened that the Legends rep was here on the same day, and I rode.
What a coincidence!
Yeah, I rode the factory bike. It was a Dyna at the time. I rode the Dyna around the same test ride loop we have, which here for suspension tuning, anyways, we're really lucky because we have a lot of potholes and a lot of drainage ditches and stuff that you can get a pretty good speed at, so you can get a really good feel for it.
Good testing grounds around here.
So I rode the Harley one, and it was better, than the stock one. And then I rode the Legends one, and I told the Harley rep at the time straight up, I was like, you want to know what you're going to be compared to? Go ride that bike. Yeah. And he wouldn't do it, obviously, but that's what you're going to get compared to. If you're in that market, then be in that market and make a premium product. And
then you're going to fight with the premium products. Yeah.
So, and then, we've talked at length about Wilburs. I mean, the best thing about that is their big system is it's self-adjusting. I mean, once you set it up, you don't have to worry a thing about it.
But you just get it for touring bikes. So no way to get it for Dynas, Softails, anything else.
Which is a majority of the market, right now in the U.S. Yeah, it's big market. And then we've talked, several times about Öhlins. Are kind of like, I call it the gold standard because they are like the high-end, suspension product. They offer a lot of adjustability. They have a wide range of products for a wide range of vehicles. They have certain key products for Harleys. Which they're either inverted or cartridge front ends, and then they have a wide range of shock absorbers depending on what you want to do with it. But they'll do just about anything you want, anything you need.
We should touch a little bit on performance baggers and kind of the application of these inverted front ends. They're getting really popular right now, and so we'll touch on that a little bit.
You're actually seeing, let's talk about it now. Okay. It's cool. You're actually seeing, some innovation in that area too, with anti-dive technology that they're starting to adapt to the Öhlins stuff, which Öhlins has had that on some of their, higher end, racing performance shocks or front ends and stuff like that. And Harley actually I saw for the first time ever when I saw the Pan America demo or whatever you want to call it, display bike. I noticed right away that it had anti-dive and that it had electronically controlled suspension, wires coming out of the top of the fork. And I was like, all right, man, now we're onto something. They're going to actually step up their game big time on this bike, and that's really cool to see. But yeah, even in the Öhlins arena on Harleys anyways, there's a lot of guys innovating in the performance bagger. Market's huge right now. MJK is one I've seen a lot of lately. They use a anti-dive situation on theirs. It's an anti-dive valve, and it looks really cool, and I'm sure it works great. He's got a track bike now for that King of the Baggers race that's coming up, which is ridiculously, high.
Laguna Seca, you got baggers.
And that bike of his is something. I mean, I've looked at it on Instagram a few times. I'm like, man, this thing is it's totally redone. I mean, the the frame's redone, the rear section's redone, everything's been done on that bike. It's a beautiful machine, and they have them riding on the track, and it's laying it down. So
yeah, and it's funny how, you know, a lot of people will say like, well, isn't that kind of an oxymoron where it's a performance bagger? Baggers are kind of supposed to be these grandpa bikes that, you know, you just cruise and you tour along the freeway, but it's really cool kind of how you have this emergence of this trend, which I'm totally on board with because I ride a bagger and I don't ride slow either. And so, you know, I rode, you know, if those of you have seen my 131 Road King special video the other day, customer of ours who, Jim, who let me ride his bike, he had the Kraus inverted front end, which
is also
utilizes the Olin's.
Yep.
And it was awesome. It was fun. And you can ride that bike harder and faster through the turns than you can stock by far.
So yeah, like we were talking about, like the performance bagger, that's a popular mod, is the, you know, inverted front end, and the advantage there is you're transferring a lot of the weight that's we talk about sprung and unsprung weight. So there's like, and you know, suspensions, you're talking about reciprocal weight that's moving around and weight that's actually static. So you're transferring a fair amount of the weight that's normally moving in the actual fork itself up to a static position above the, you know, moving components or the leg or whatever.
You just answered a really good question I get asked a lot. You know, people see the inverted front end, they hear it a lot, but kind of people are like, well, what's the point of flipping the forks upside down?
That's part of it, and the other part of it is stability.
Yeah, like, you got a much stiffer fork tube.
Yep.
Because the
fatter part.
Yeah, the fatter part is.
Yeah, so it's not so much of a concern on the street, but like when you're going faster and faster, you know, the as great as the Harley-Davidson stock forks are, they're kind of weak link is the tube, the wall thickness of the tube's kind of thin, and it doesn't flex as much as like a 39 millimeter used to, like on a Sporty or a Dyna or whatever, but there's a fair amount of flex at, you know, like say 90, 95, 100 miles an hour, and then, you know, factor in like the, you know, the forces of a turn or whatever, and the forks can actually kind of, you know, flex a little bit independently of one another, and you eliminate a lot of that, or if not all of it, with the inverted front end with a more stout, you know, non-moving member of the suspension.
Yeah, you know, another thing that Stefan said earlier was you can really increase the lean angle of these as well. You know, we did that performance bagger on a Road Glide, I want to say like 5 or 6 months ago. Yeah. And I think we did the Big Bears.
So yeah, Big Bear's doing a lot in that realm. So when you talk about those front ends, you know, first thing is those forks do not fit in a stock tree, because they're larger. They're like normally like in the 50 millimeter range of, you know, actual size. They don't fit into the tree, so you have to have a custom made set of, you know, fork brace or fork brackets, or triple trees as we call them, to house those or to retain those forks. So, you know, Big Bear's one of those companies that's doing it. Kevin over there, he's actually doing extended, so he has an extension kit for him,
which raises the whole seat height.
Which raises the whole seat height of the bike. Which
allows you to lean even more into the
turns. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and he'll probably chime up in the comments because he's active on social media. I think they offer it in stock height. I want to say 2 and 3 inch.
Okay, that sounds right.
Over heights, as well as they sell a corresponding height increaser for the rear shock. So the Olin's actual rear shock, the remote reservoir ones, you can tune the height of them to a certain extent, but I think it's only like 1 inch. And you have to add, if you want to go higher than that and you want to level it out, say you're doing 2, like on that bike we did 2 inches in the front, I think we did 3. And then
you got to be taller. You know, when you're raising the
So I rode that bike, and when I was moving, I was good to go. But when I came to a stop, I was like dirt bike style,
one side,
leaning on one leg. Yeah, and it, you know, performed well. But yeah, for me, for usability, it's not feasible.
It's a fashion trend, and those bikes look cool. They do perform, and there's a specific type of rider who loves them, and the others admire it or hate it. Yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
but they look cool.
Yeah, they do. Totally. They do look cool. Which, Jeff talked about that on the podcast when we did with him. Like, they're trying to establish like a matrix of what actually defines a performance bagger versus
it gets overused way too much.
Because the term's been like really overused. Yeah. So they're out there in Arizona, and they have a motor witch that's in their shop, and they're like, actually they have discussions about this stuff. I saw Jeff today actually, and it's dyno, it's brake testing and suspension testing and lean angle testing. Like they're coming up with this whole plan of how they're gonna like have this leaderboard of like.
And then you have a certified performance.
Yeah,
right.
That's their idea. Yeah. But
that's kind of funny.
But yeah, so going back to those inverted front ends, and the adjustability is there too. You can adjust a preload, you can adjust the compression and rebound dampening,
which is what you pay for with that tall price tag.
Which is what you pay for, and you're good to be able to tune the suspension to your riding style. So it's more prevalent, in the mountainous areas like where we're at. The people are up there in the canyons getting after it on their big 900-pound baggers, and you got to use some, you got to get a better setup to, if you're going to really ride like that, you really need to invest some money in your suspension.
Yeah, and you better go to a closed track, otherwise you find some new friends like you did recently.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I don't know what it is lately. I just had bad luck with local law enforcement, but
yeah, like Stefan
we support local law enforcement, by the way, though.
Yeah,
especially you do.
Yeah.
Like Stefan said, it's partially a fashion statement, and partially, for certain segment of guys, it's actually like a usability, adjustability, rideability situation that they're trying to get into. And yeah, there's stuff going on there too, and they're great. They'll do everything you want them to do, man. Like and more, and that. I mean, you've ridden them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up style, because that is kind of a big component of it. When we had our performance bagger out there on the floor,
it was about 1 year ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, about that. Yeah. They, we had the big old fat remote reservoirs, gold right above the saddlebags there, and I'm just like, oh yeah, that looks so sexy. But we had people come in and say like,
what is that?
What is that? What does that do? That looks so stupid.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
it's not for everyone.
Yeah. Stupid. Like that's badass, man. What are you talking about, dude? Like that's awesome. Yeah. But I mean, it's not for everybody, and I guess you got to take an inventory of how you're going to ride the bike and what your budget is, and to determine if it's for you or not. But
so that's a hot topic, because that whole segment's a hot topic right now. That's what everyone's into, and that's why they're having that King of the Baggers race, just to see how bad they can make these things and how fast they can make them go.
And the whole bike thing is not necessary. It's lifestyle. Yeah.
Right.
Like it, all different styles of bikes, all different brands.
Yeah.
Nobody needs it. There's no reason, especially in Europe when it's raining, to get on a bike when you have the car. So it's just an additional way of transportation.
Yeah, and just as
enjoy it,
just to hem up the Olin's conversation, they're a great marketing company. They sponsor a lot of riders, a lot of races, a lot of they've been out there a long time. They have a lot of innovation. They're kind of on the leading edge of stuff, and so they do a good job at marketing, which is a big component of the suspension world. Because like Stefan was saying earlier, besides having the stickers on his front end, you wouldn't know that they're modified at all.
No, only if you.
Yeah,
if you sit on the bike.
Exactly. That's feel, and that the seat of the pants is a big one. It's a big marketing, factor. So kind of moving on from Olin's, there's the Legend stuff, which is really high quality. It works really well. They have shocks. They have a regular shock. They have their Revo A shock, which is I was talking about earlier, which you can adjust the rebound dampening on. Then they have their newer shocks. It's like a piggyback shock that you can actually change the compression dampening and everything onto, as well as they have a pretty there's a non-adjustable front end, or a cartridge insert for the front end. You set up the preload with it. It doesn't rely on the oil for dampening. It's actually internally dampened with gas pressures. So you basically set the preload on that, put it in, and there's really no maintenance to it. There's a little bit of oil. I want to say it's like 7 or 6 or 8 ounces, something like that. I can't remember.
Is that the Axial, like what
Jed
Axial
has?
Yeah,
That's
so
what
I just
Jed
posted a video
has.
yesterday on a Lowrider S, and Jed has that Axial front end, and it felt good. It felt really good. He's got rust ornament on the rear, and that was just a really nice, compliant, comfortable ride, both on the freeway and in the turns. Yeah,
they're good, and they use the oil just to lubricate the internal components and keep them as not too much cooling going on, but at least lubricated. They work good. They're a good drop-in setup if you get this preload right. You're gonna do pretty good with those ones. And then since you mentioned Russ Wernemont, their Russ's background, we know him really well. He's we've partnered with them on a lot of these fairing bikes and stuff like that. But their suspension comes from an off-road background. So there's like 10 suspension adjustments, everything from completely locked out to there's no movement at all. And he accomplishes it solely through the valving movement of this one adjustment that they actually have besides preload, which is amazing. When I was like, you can lock this thing out completely and then go all the way soft just by the flick of a dial. And he demonstrated it really handily, and I was like, wow, man, that is insane. But it comes from a off-road background, so he's heavily into the off-road, you know, truck circuit and razors and side-by-sides now. They're doing a lot with razor suspension. So yeah, that's where that comes from. But they're really popular because they're cool looking, you know, and for the stunt guys, because they sponsor a lot of those stunt rider guys, they can completely lock their suspension out, which is an advantage when you're trying to pop a wheelie. You don't want your suspension moving at all, you know. And when you want to do a roasty burnout and get your wheelie on, that's what you want, you know, and that shock has that ability to lock it. That's the only one that I know of on the market that you can simply just reach down and lock your suspension out completely, which, you know, Fox has that capability on their mountain bike shocks and stuff like that, but not on their vehicle street shocks. So that's something that from the mountain bike world, you know, you can lock the suspension out when you're hill climbing or whatever, because then you don't have any wasted energy when you're trying to pedal. Right. So there's that, and then like you mentioned Fox, which their stuff's kind of on the level of Legends. It's, you know, really adjustable, really nice, looks really nice. It's real pretty. Can do, you know, pretty much anything you want to do with it on the street. And works really well, as well as a Progressive. They've been out there for a long time. The nice thing about Progressive is they still offer a lifetime warranty on their shock that goes with the shock. You know, you buy the shock today and you sell your bike to another customer and it starts leaking, they'll take care of it, no problem. Good, they have a wide range of offerings, everywhere from the low end budget stuff to, you know, high end, you know, piggyback. They have remote stuff too, but it's not as technologically advanced as a lot of the other systems that are out there. They're a little more rudimentary, a little more simple, you know. And they do require a little bit more adjustment. They're not as just, you know, put it on and forget it as a lot of these other ones are. And then I spoke about it a little earlier, which is some of the we're starting to see the emergence of electronic, you know, components coming into the market. That Thundermax iRide is great for shorter riders that want to ride a bigger bike and they want to be able to plant their feet and then, you know, have the ability to jack the bike up and get the lean angles and the suspension movement.
When you take off, doesn't it automatically fill the suspension and bring you up?
With the speed.
It's speed sensitive.
Speed sensitive.
Yeah,
okay.
so it plugs into actually the speed or the data port on the actual bike, and it interfaces with the vehicle speed. I want to say it's 25 miles an hour. It starts to move up.
So the primary customer you recommend that for is just someone that has a short inseam that wants to be able to plant his feet, you know, confidently at a stoplight. Easily,
you know, adjusted by your hand. And once you get it set up, most guys, I think that are running that one, they don't mess with it a bunch. Once they get their speed settings, their, you know, stop setting, their low speed setting, their high speed setting set up, they just kind of leave it alone. Again, it's one side's conventional, you know, spring shock, and the other side's an airbag or an air assisted, you know, shock. And then, you know, recently I've seen this company called Bitubo that came out. They're a European company, I believe, too. That
a pretty old one. I remember.
Yeah, they've been around for a while.
From my teenager years, that I heard them manufacturing shocks.
Yeah, and they have Jeff Holt's got a set of those that they're putting on. I think it might be the Street Bob that we were with them.
Did they just recently get into the Harley-Davidson
world?
Yeah,
they're getting back into the Harley-Davidson world, or getting into the Harley-Davidson world.
Following suit with Wilbur's, huh?
Yeah.
Maybe I should offer them as well.
Yeah, but I don't know all the details about there. I just saw him recently, and Jeff's pretty informative on his videos. Hopefully, he puts out a good one on that one, which I'm sure he will. But they're electronically adjusted fork and shock, from what I've seen. So just kind of like a teaser of where these things are going. It's just going to continue to innovate like everything else does.
But you have to spend time as a customer, and you have to go to a dealership because you can't do all this research on your own.
Right.
Maybe you're just lucky that you have a buddy with the same bike, the same riding style, who already did the thinking, and you're able to test ride a bike and say, that's exactly the way I want it. And then you just go ahead and order your set on the internet and have it installed. Otherwise, it takes a lot of research and knowledge and experience, and you have to go to a good dealership in order to get a fair consultation. What you need, what you want to spend, what suits you the best.
Yep.
And like Stefan said earlier, it's you got to ride it and feel it. You got to, once you feel it, you'll know right away. Like the difference when you feel a bike that's well suspended and the way it feels, the way it you know, performs, and the feedback you get and the way the controllability of it is everything.
And that's one of the things that, you know, Jamie is so good at is he's ridden so many bikes, so many dirt bikes, bicycles, Harley-Davidson his entire life. And so he knows what's good, and he knows kind of where he needs to sit on the bike. And he knows, you know, when he goes over a certain bump, hey, this handled it well, or this didn't handle it well. However, new riders coming into the Harley-Davidson world, they get on bikes and they have nothing to compare it to. And they don't really have that feel of the pants, you know, so to speak, to really know, okay, this is good or this isn't good, or, you know, this is too rough, it's not handling properly, I need to make an adjustment. Some people just might think, okay, well, this is just the way a Harley is supposed to ride. And so unless you kind of have that, you know, compass, then, you know, you really don't know what exactly, you know, to look for when you're adjusting your bike.
Yeah, Jamie's my friend that Stefan talks about, that does all the research and knows everything there is to know.
But it's good to have such a friend. Otherwise, you have to spend time. Just play with the knobs and then see what difference it makes on the same piece of road, and then see, oh, that's not getting better, so turn it back the other way. And it's kind of an exhausting process getting your special dials that you are just happy with the bike.
It is, but it's time well worth it. I mean, my experience is most of these guys, when they try to do their own tuning, they'll crank everything way up, way higher than it needs to be. They'll crank they'll be like, well, it's on the lowest setting, so the highest setting must be better for me. But
so
that's not true. It's too much. You gotta like go click by click and feel it, you know. And actually, the Legends instructions, they do a really great job of explaining in layman's terms. Like, if you're feeling pogoing, this is the problem. Your rebound's too fast or whatever. If you're feeling like your suspension's wallowing, the rebound's too slow or the compression's too much. They do a really good job, and then they tell you exactly what to do. Hey, try that. Click this clicker, you know, lower. Or click this clicker higher. And I point that out only because not all the manufacturers do that. With the adjustability of their suspension. And it helps from a customer standpoint because they don't really need to know the technology and how it all works. They just need to know how to interface with it. Yeah. They need to know how to work it, you know. So that's important. And, you know, like Stefan was saying, you know, just it's time well spent. If you're spending, you know, $900 to $1,000 a copy on some shocks, and the same amount on, you know, an adjustable cartridge front end or whatever, it's worth your money and time to spend the moments to get that thing set up for what you're trying to do with it. Like, that's why you bought it. I mean, that's the only reason. That's the only good reason to buy stuff like that.
Yeah, otherwise, you can just buy the sticker and put it on.
Which happens. Exactly. Yeah, it happens too. Yeah.
You know, there's guys. I'm not a big guy that goes out to track days and does track days on sport bikes, but I do know that there are like suspension guys at tracks that you roll up on your bike and he says, well, hey, you want to decrease 5 seconds off your lap time? Let's have you sit on your bike and I'm going to adjust your suspension for you. And I've heard so many stories of friends that have gone to the track and had their suspension adjusted by a pro that does it, you know, on the daily, and they get on it. And it's like, wow, it's like a whole different bike. Like, my bike is now a way better bike without spending I had to spend, you know, $20 with this guy or whatever, and he dialed it in. So, you know, going back to the point we keep making, you know, going to a dealership, you know, when I sat on my bike when we were adjusting the wheel bars, you know, you have to measure things like sag when you first sit on the bike. If you sit on a motorcycle and that motorcycle does not move, not 1 millimeter down, well, that's a problem right there. Like, it should go down a little bit, and that's what they call sag.
That's a good point, because that's a proper way to adjust preload. Sag is the right way to do it. These click adjustments and stuff like that, it gets you in the ballpark, but you know, and Harley doesn't really put out those, you know, numbers as far as what they want, what the best sag numbers are. They just tell you, hey, put it at this. If they're this way, put it here.
I think they don't, because on some of these street glides and road glides, you know, the specials that have the lower suspension, like, unless you weigh a fair bit, like in the 200s, like, that bike's not going to go down at all when you sit on that thing. It's because it's oversprung. They have to overspring it, because then you get two people on there that are heavy people, you know, it's going to bottom otherwise. And bottoming is just about the worst thing that can happen to you. I'd rather have a bike that's oversprung, that's too stiff, than not stiff enough, and I'm hitting the bottom of the spring every time.
Yeah.
But in the first place, you want to have a bike that's beautiful. Yeah. And here we come again.
And that's the priority that so many people have, right? Is they want, you know, looks first, which I never want to compromise looks either. You know, I'm a looks guy for sure, but
especially the taller windscreen or the lower one? Oh no, I remember you saying that.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Your street glide.
Yeah. Once you go too big, and you just kind of grandpa. Although I'm 6'6", and I could definitely benefit from a taller one, but I don't because I want it to look cool. But anyways.
So yeah, I mean that's pretty much all I had to talk about for suspension. Who knows where this thing's gonna go? Maybe Stefan knows. Like
definitely not me.
Yeah. Where the future leads us. I mean, think electronics coming, anti-dives coming, all those things that we see, that we like, that those of us that ride other motorcycles and Harleys like enjoy about the suspension on other bikes is starting to apply to Harleys too. So
yeah, but Harley is still a Harley.
Yeah, that's true.
When I got the old BMW, which I really tried to freshen up, it's looking almost new. I thought of, what about canceling the Harley order? My dealership would have welcomed it if I canceled the CVO, because they could have
sold it to someone else.
Yeah, sell it to someone else. And then I took the old Road King of my friend just for a few miles. And I don't want to miss that Harley feeling. It's something special. It's slower than with other bikes. The lean angle is less, but the experience is, in my opinion, much more.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to go Harley too far with all their bikes into the electronics market.
Yeah.
They have to retain at least a couple of bikes for the grandpas.
Sure.
I'm glad you said that, Stefan. And that's something that is the response to like 50% of the questions I get from people. And it's usually not in person. It's usually the internet people that want to know why, you spend this much money for a bike that, for half the price, you can get something that has more horsepower and that has better suspension.
Yeah, and it's cheaper. Half the price. Yeah, you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't listen.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And it's what you said. It's kind of that unspoken thing that so many people have a hard time articulating, but it's just the beauty of the machine, the mechanical feeling, that rawness of it. And I'm the same as you. I got in this argument online. I try not to do that too much, but I did. And I was arguing with a guy about adjustable windshields. And I think it was like a guy talking about the Indian and how you can move it up and down. I said, I hope that Harley-Davidson never has an adjustable windshield, at least on their cruisers.
Because it won't fit into the narrow design of the fairing.
It's ugly. Yeah. It's ugly, and then you got this motor in the front. And, so anyways, that's just kind of reiterates the point that you made about having too much electronics on these classic, beautiful, simple line bikes, that once you get too much tech, it just becomes ugly. And so it's kind of like the pureness and the beauty of the machine is a thing and an element that Harley-Davidson does better than anybody else out there. So
yeah, one of my favorite bikes, and my first bike was just a basic Sportster, like bare bones, the most barest motorcycle, barest Harley anyways that you're ever going to see. But there's something so beautiful about it because it's so simple.
Yeah.
It's so simple. There's no bells and whistles. There's not a bunch of stuff hanging off of it. The motor's out there for you to see. The chassis is out there for you to see.
Yep, not covered up.
There's no hiding of it. There's no cowlings or nothing. Nothing's hidden. And it's super simple, but it's so much fun to just get on it and ride. Like, I don't have to worry about anything. Just get on it and go. And that's one of my favorite bikes. I still, to this day, when I see just a basic Sportster, I'm like, dude, look at that thing, man. That is a beautiful motorcycle.
Work of art.
Yeah. So,
right on, guys. Well, anything else from, I know you traveled a long way to get here.
Yeah, just to get here.
No other reason.
No other reason. Exactly.
But all right, guys. Well, I appreciate you coming out, Stefan, and it's been a pleasure having you. And maybe
it was great fun taking part here today.
Maybe we'll have to have you on future episodes and stuff. And thanks a lot for watching, everybody. And if you're listening on podcast platforms, make sure you rate our podcast and click that subscribe button as well. And if you're listening on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and we'll be seeing you on future episodes. Make sure you let us know in the comment section what type of videos you'd like to see in the future.
Yeah.
Keith and I, I think we're gonna pick up with some more tech talk next time as it pertains to the stage 3 and 4 kits.
Yeah, it's actually good timing because if those of you out there that don't know already, that Harley announced some new stage 3 kits this week, 119 and 122-inch motors. And we don't have a lot to talk about yet on them because they're brand new, like 2 days old.
We haven't installed one yet. We haven't ridden on them.
So we're going to be talking about that stuff on a future episode.
Yeah, they're not California compliant yet, but they will be in the future. One of the things that
if they're compliant with European EPA standards, I'll be back.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I'll take that as your willingness to come back for that episode when they get compliant in Europe. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next one. Later.
See ya.
See you.